Hello everyone and welcome to another Fusion 360 Live. My name is Brad Tallis and on the keyboard I have my friend and coworker Angelo Juris. So as we're going through this live stream, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them out there and hopefully we'll be able to answer those as we go through. Today's live stream is actually kind of a fun one. We're doing one on like how to create custom materials in Fusion 360, and you might be looking at this and saying there's no way that this is actually Fusion 360, but it is. Now the trick with this is we're actually not going to be using Fusion 360 very much. We're going to be using a program that's free called Quixel Mixer, and I'm going to show this to you. And what this allows you to do is to create some of these complicated looking materials very quickly and very easily. So like for example the rusty corrugated metal, or even the water reflecting in the ground, and even these barrels, believe it or not. Let me switch over here to my design and switch to component color cycling. You'll notice that everything is pretty much blocky. I mean, this is just a revolve. Those barrels are just revolves. The palette are just rectangular shapes that I created. And then I did create kind of a corrugated metal for the background. Okay, give me a second here. Get back to my questions. Okay, thank you, Angelo. So I'm going to switch back into the render. Now, why would I be showing something like this? Well, I'm going to jump over to this one here. It's going to take a second. So this is another one. This is actually one of Jeff Smith's sketches that Israel del Toro changed into a 3D model. But what I'm really wanting to show is notice the background, okay? Notice like the water stains on the cement. And this is like an actual picture that's being reflected into the spaceship. But look, notice the damage to the cement, even like the damage to some of the walls, the dirty door, the tire tracks on the ground. So nothing is perfectly smooth, perfect, in the real world. There's going to be fingerprint smudges, there's going to be scratches, there's going to be dents and dings. And, when you're creating a rendering, and maybe not as much of a product rendering as more like, maybe you're doing a game or you're doing an interior design rendering or something like that. You want it to look as realistic as possible. And to add that realism, you're going to really spend a lot of time with lighting and also with your materials. So I mentioned a free program, and it is called Quixel Mixer. And actually, let me bring up the web page. So here's how you spell it, and it is free, believe it or not. And this is one of the products they're actually using for the Mandalorian TV show. So I'm going to just scroll through so you can kind of see some of the stuff that you can do with this. Different kinds of textures, materials, etc. Allows you to pretty much create any kind of surface you can imagine. So I'm just going to keep going. So you'll notice like scratches and paint is being worn on the edges and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to spend the time showing you exactly how to use every single thing in the product, but I am going to show you how you could use it for something like this. For example, this interior design. Notice the flooring, and even the metal on this table right here. You can see it has some rust or some wear to it, for example. Also, if you want to, you can go to their gallery and you can see some of the stuff that people are making with this product. It's absolutely incredible. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I wanted to show like some of these interior designs. Like, how would you create like this sandy textured wall or this worn shelf that looks like it has dust on it, including the vases and everything? It's just pretty amazing. Same thing with like interior designs. So I recommend going through and just seeing what people are creating with this. Like here's another interior design just, you know, some cabinetry and the sofas, but like the rug, the floor, etc. And even notice the wall in the background has some texture to it. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Quixel Mixer, it is free. You do have to sign up for it, but it's a pretty cool program. And I actually have that mud texture already loaded. I'm going to kind of show how this works. Okay, so you'll notice we got some water, we've got some rock, etc. And so the main goal, I'll kind of tell you where we're headed with this. The main goal is I'm going to show you how you're going to get this material over into Fusion. And that actually has to do with what you see over here. And we're going to export these layers basically out into a material. Now you'll notice I'm in my layers tab and I have a bunch of layers here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these off. So you're going to see basically it's almost like Photoshop for creating materials. So you start with just a base layer and then you can bring in an existing material. So this is just the mud texture and it just kind of looks like mud. Kind of boring. Okay, but then I can add in some gravel, and watch when I toggle this on or off, you can kind of see how it's basically filling in the low points. So you can see in this area here, I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and it's going to fill in those low points. And you'll notice I'm in my mud layer. I can actually change a lot of these settings, and I'm going to get different results. So you'll see, you know, if I turn off the other layer, it's just going to show the gravel, for example. I can also come in here and say, is it coming from above or coming from below? And again, this will make more sense as we go through. And then how much. So you're going to see I can change this threshold and it will affect. And this will make more sense as we go through. Actually, I should have been in the gravel layer. That's why nothing was changing. But so here you can kind of see how I can change the threshold of this particular, how much gravel is coming in, for example. I can also change the opacity, and you can almost think of it as almost like creating like gradient edges and stuff like that. That's kind of filling in, you know, what's dark gets filled in, what's light doesn't, or vice versa. So you can kind of see I can change a lot of these settings to get a totally different material than what I started out with. So then I'm going to turn on the noise layer, and you can kind of see how, let me zoom back out again, that adds some like bumpiness to it. So if I click on this noise layer, you can see we can change the amplitude. Now I'm going to over exaggerate so you can kind of see what's going on here. But you can kind of see how you can change how bumpy it is, what the frequency is. It's kind of fun to watch. Okay, how many octaves is basically how many different kinds of bumps are there. And in fact, I could turn these other layers off to basically look at it this way. So you can kind of see how increasing the octaves gives me a lot more bumpiness to it. Increasing the amplitude, obviously, kind of makes it look more like mountains, etc. Again, I'm not going to cover every single one here, but let's just go ahead and accept that. Then you can turn on this moisture layer, and you can kind of see how it creates almost like this shiny mud, which is pretty cool. And then finally, and again, it has a whole bunch of options, you know, what's the threshold? So I can change, you know, how muddy is it? So I just kind of want them in the low areas, like so. What the radius is, and you can kind of see how that changes. Some of that, detail, etc. And then finally I'm going to turn on these water puddles, and this is what creates that reflectivity. And so you can see, you know, here's that moisture level. Let me click on water puddles, and then here's the water puddles. And just like before, pretty much every single layer has these sliders that you can come in and adjust, you know, how much is it affecting this particular layer. And you can type in numbers, etc. So that's kind of the idea behind creating a material here. Now I'm going to create another material real quick, and then we're going to export it out so you can kind of see how you can bring that into Fusion. So I'm going to say a new mix. Well, we'll give it a name. I'll just call it demo or something like that. You can specify what the resolution is. Again, depending on how powerful your computer is, you might want to not go too crazy, but I have 4,000 pixels. And it's just going to start with a plain layer, basically, this base layer. Now, here's where the amazing part comes in. So you see this local library and then online. I'm going to click on online, and there are hundreds and thousands of materials that are free. And this is what blows me away. I'm just going to kind of scroll through. So you're going to see, you know, different kinds of flooring, different kinds of rock, etc., staircases, buckets. I mean, just a ton of stuff. In fact, going back to here, this garbage bag I downloaded, or I got from Quixel Mixer. It's just a mesh file. So you can also come in here and look at all the different subcategories. So I don't really want to see any of the 3D stuff right now, so I'm going to just look for surfaces, and you'll notice that all the 3D stuff kind of goes away and it's just showing surfaces. Well, I want to do some kind of metal, so I'm going to come over here to metal, and you'll see all of the different kinds of metals. And now here's where it gets kind of cool. You'll notice it says like scratched metal. If I click on it, it gives me an image of what this looks like, and then I could download that particular material. There's also going to be, for example, like if I go to rusty metal, there's going to be some existing materials like this rusty metal sheet. So you can kind of see what that looks like. Rusty metal panel. So you can kind of see, I mean, look at how much time would it take for you to create, you know, this rust. And even the fact that the rust is like dripping down from the screw holes or the nail holes or something like that is pretty amazing, right? So you can do different kinds of, like, you know, corrugated rusty metal sheets, you know, that look dented, etc. Okay, so there is a ton of stuff in here. Debris, you know, construction debris, all this kind of stuff. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in here, but some of the ones that are pretty cool are, for example, imperfections. So this is where you've got your scratches, your dings, your dents. I'm going to keep going, and you can see there's hundreds of different kinds of scratched metal, you know, that might have some pits, some stains, all that kind of stuff on there. We're going to come back to that here in a little bit. So, you know, here's, you know, maybe fingerprints or whatever, water stains, etc. I am going to go to, let's go to brick. And here you can see all the different kinds of bricks that they have. And like I mentioned before, you just click on one and it'll show you an image what that looks like. So we're going to build something kind of like this. So I'm going to go to my local library, and I already have some of these materials that I've downloaded already. So let's just start with maybe this rock wall. So I just click on it, and you can see it's going to add that as a layer. Now it looks kind of weird right now. And again, I'm not covering every single command or anything like that, or this is the exact way of doing it. This is just me basically playing around with it. There are a ton of YouTube tutorials on how to use this product. Again, I have nothing to do with this product. It was just something that I learned about and found it really useful for creating materials for Fusion 360. So what is it doing? Well, it's showing both layers. So I'm going to turn off the eyeball next to my base layer, and now I have this layer right here. And this is just kind of a starting point. Well, maybe I want to put maybe some like dirt or grass or something kind of in the nooks and crannies of this. So what I'm going to do now is add a surface layer, and I can pick a different material. So let's do maybe like this forest floor or something like that, and you're going to see that it's going to put it on top of this particular layer, and you can see we now have two different layers, and it even blows me away that the leaves have a little bit of reflectivity to them because they're catching the sky, the sun. So you can kind of see what that looks like as we rotate around. Now, that's a little bit too much, let me kind of pan this around, a little bit too much of the ground cover. So again, I can change how much shows up. By dragging this opacity down, we can kind of change what that looks like. Okay. Or I can change this threshold, and you'll see right now it's at 0. If I crank this up, it's going to basically be on top of the other layer. If I crank this down, it's going to basically be below the other layer. So this threshold really kind of allows me to figure out how much of that do I want in the nooks and crannies. It's pretty cool. Okay. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that dirt. Maybe I'll just do like minus 0.2 or something like that. Let's see what that gives us. Yeah, so let's just do maybe 0.2. Now here's something also I think is pretty amazing. I'm actually going to crank this up real quick just so you can kind of see what this looks like. You can even control, is the moss down near the bottom because it's growing up from the ground and it can't climb all the way up. So you can do things such as creating, and I'm not gonna, let's see if, usually it shows me how to do it. Weird. Sorry guys. Oh, here it is, I'm sorry. So you can do these different layers, and that allows you to basically change what's showing up underneath. And again, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on doing that, but you can create different like masking layers and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to show that right now because I don't see the command for it. Not sure why. Okay, so I'm going to crank this back down a little bit, and then I want to maybe add a little bit of sand or something like that. So I do the exact same thing. I just come in and add a surface layer. You can do like decals. You can do like solid layers. You can see this liquid layer. Let me go ahead and add in that liquid layer, and there you can see we just added in the liquid, and I can have that sitting, you know, down in little puddles or something like that, for example. Okay, so let's add one more layer here. I'm just going to do this, and let's do kind of this dry sand or something, and we'll change it to snow here in a little bit. But now I'm going to add this dry sand, and it's going to look kind of interesting, like it's down into all of the cracks. Again, by changing that threshold, I can change that, but I actually want it sitting on top of the rock, like maybe it got blown on top of the rock. So instead of from below, I'm going to say from above. And now you can kind of see, when we crank up this threshold, you can kind of see how we can do that, right? So I'm just going to kind of just do a little bit here, and then the radius allows you to, like, you know, how much is it kind of overflowing, or is it pretty much patchy? Like you can kind of see almost like there's no Gaussian blur, but when I add this radius, it's adding a little bit of a Gaussian blur to it, which is allowing it to see a little bit more of the material. So I'm just going to kind of crank that down a little bit. And again, I could spend all day kind of showing this, but you can kind of get the idea how we started with a basic shape like this, or basic material, and we can come in and just keep adding other materials on top of it. So this would be really cool for like a rock wall, or maybe, you know, cobblestone road or something like that. Well, what about like some metals? So let's do a new mix. Let's call this one copper demo or something like that. I'll say okay. And I'm going to start in my local library. I want to change from surface. I'm going to go to imperfection. So I'm going to start with an imperfection. And here are a bunch of different imperfections. And you can notice like rust, scratched metal, etc. So I could do, you know, scratched. And it's going to show all of just the scratched metals. So you can kind of see all of these different scratched metals. okay, or scratched rubber, etc. So let's just take a look at that guy there, and it's going to bring it in as a layer. Now it doesn't look like it did anything, but if I turn off my base layer, we can now see this, basically this scratched metal imperfection. Now it's a little fine, so I'm going to go to this placement, and you can see tiling repetitions. So let's change that from like 4 to 2, and you'll see that it'll instantly update. Let's change, oops, change that from 4 to 2, and that'll update also. So now we can kind of see what that looks like. I could even go maybe to 1. Let's just do 1 and 1, see what that looks like. So you have a lot of control, just like in Photoshop or whatever, you have a lot of control over what that's going to look like. Okay, so now I have this imperfection. I want it to look kind of like copper. So I'll come back here, and instead of an imperfection, let's just do a surface. And here is some copper. So I'm just going to click on copper, and it's going to put that layer on top. Okay, so now the copper layer actually had some scratches and stuff like that, and it's a little bit hard to see what's going on here, but I'm going to turn off the scratched metal, and you see like nothing really changes because the copper is 100% opacity. Watch what happens when I start to drag this down. You're going to start to see, and I'm going to go really far so you can kind of see what's going on, but now you're seeing that underlying imperfection that we used. So the copper already had some, but we're basically adding this scratched metal in here. So I'm going to go ahead and drag that up a little bit, and now we have those scratches. And think about how long it would take to model or create something like this. I use model all the time because I'm talking about Fusion, but to create something like this in like Photoshop or whatever, and you have so much power behind like how do I change it, what I want it to look like, etc. Okay, so I kind of like this material the way it is now, and you'll notice all of these over here. These are our different layers. Now this albedo is the actual color, and you'll notice it's kind of a light tan. If I turn that off, you're going to see how the color kind of changes to more of like an iron or something like that. So this is the color of the material. Metalness is like what is causing it to reflect. Roughness, basically, if it's not rough at all, the light is going to really reflect off of it, and that's why it looks so washed out. So there's actually a little roughness layer to make that look nicer. Displacement, there's not going to be any displacement because it's all one plane. And then there's like normals and occlusion and opacity, and I'll show this again on some other stuff. So I like this material the way it looks. I want to export it. So I'm going to come over here to export. And here's kind of the important part. So you'll notice it says, you know, what's the surface name? I can give it a name. Where's it going to save? And I recommend putting it into like a temp folder, create a subfolder, and I'll show this. And then what maps are we wanting to export? So obviously we want the color, the diffuse, specular. I definitely want the roughness, the normal map, displacement map, and then I don't need the ambient occlusion. I'll turn that one off, and I don't need the metalness. So you can turn any of these on or off. And then you also have the ability to specify what kind of format. So you'll notice like this displacement is exporting as an EXR. I could also say make it a PNG or a TGA or whatever. I'm going to leave that alone. But you'll notice, for example, the normal map is a PNG. So I'm going to leave everything kind of default. I'm just going to leave those guys alone. So these are my maps. And then down here, let me go up to here. I'm going to go layers. And then export. I was trying to get it to... Oh, I know why. Sorry. There we go. I was like, I know there's a button down here. I didn't have my screen maximized. So there's this export 6 maps. And I'm going to bring up, here is the temp folder, Quixel Mixer. And you'll notice I've got, muddy brick and wet mud and snowy mountains and stuff like that. Well, this one's going to be called Copper Demo. So watch what happens when I say export 6 maps. I'll have to bring it back up. Okay, so I'm looking at the questions while it's exporting. So Peter asked, is this something Brad created from scratch in Quixel, or is it a preloaded example? Great question. This is this I created all from scratch and also used a preloaded material. So I started with something and I tweaked with it a little bit until I got it looking the way I want. So for example, this rusty corrugated metal is actually multiple materials. You'll notice I've got some dark rust, I've got some light rust, I've got some stains, all that kind of stuff, some dents, etc. This is probably 6 or 7 layers just to create that corrugated metal. I'll show this barrel here in just a second. And then this wood pallet is a totally custom material that I created using Quixel. So yeah, great question. So Ethan asked, I'd love to see a follow-up live stream dedicated to scenes and renderings. So I will try and do that. I do have a tips and tricks live stream that I did probably about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, on rendering tips and tricks on lighting, HDRI images, filleted edges, etc. So you might look for that, but maybe I'll do another one here soon. So thanks for asking about that. Okay, so I'm just going to go to this corrugated metal, and you'll notice I actually have a flat sheet, and then I actually created some corrugated metal also, just an extrusion. I used the thin extrude to do that. So let's go back to Quixel. I exported those maps, and we should now see Copper Demo. And if I go into this folder, you're going to see a bunch of different materials. So here's that albedo, here's the diffuse, here's the displacement, the normal, roughness, etc. Okay? So let's jump out and let's go into this wet mud. I'm going to show this one. This might make a little bit more sense. So here's the albedo, the displacement, the normal, and the roughness. Now these, you'll notice, look a little bit different. And let me see if I can bring up this image. So this is what it's actually creating, is all of these maps for me automatically. And this is what we're going to bring into Fusion to, and there's the actual picture of the kind of the color of the mud. So this is what we're going to bring into Fusion to create our material. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the wet mud first because it really visually lets you see what's going on, and then we'll do the copper next. So, okay. Now, I've created my materials, everything I'm happy with. Now I'm in Fusion. And we're going to do the wet mud over here, and then maybe we'll do the copper over on this guy or something. So, I'm going to create an appearance. And you can see I was already messing around with this. I want to start with basically a base material. I want to create a whole new material. I don't want to start with metal or paint or anything like that. So I'm going to go into Other, and we have base materials. And you'll notice we have base material metal, opaque, layered, transparent. So for example, if you were creating like, automotive paint or something like that, you might do a layered base material where it has a color coat and then a clear coat. And you can actually change, a lot of settings for each of those coats, for example. I'm just going to do a base material opaque. So I'm just going to drag that onto there. And now I have a material that I can edit. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on it to edit. And let's just call this mud. Okay. Now you'll notice roughness, reflectance, etc. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with this advanced. Okay, and I'm going to move this and make this a little bit bigger so we can kind of see what's going on here. Okay, What this is allowing us to do is we're editing this material, and I can pick a particular color, and you'll notice by default it's kind of this plain gray color. Well, if I click on this little down arrow, I can say image. We'll go into this wet mud. Let's do that albedo. And notice this really cool looking countertop now that looks like mud. Notice how shiny it is and how reflective it is. That's because we haven't changed any of those. We just said instead of a color, use an image. And look how gorgeous that image looks. It's pretty cool, right? Okay, and I just kind of work my way down. So reflectance. Now watch what happens when I drag this down. You'll see it's not quite as reflective. It's still reflecting, but if I crank that up, it's going to be a lot more reflective. Well, instead of just a slider doing that, we're actually going to use a map. So you can see here we've got the different materials. In fact, I don't have, let me go back. Let me do muddy brick instead, because I think I have, yeah. Let me do muddy brick instead. I apologize, guys. Let me change this image to muddy brick. Edit image. Let me do the muddy brick here. So it's going to look pretty similar. Okay. There's the image. It's still really shiny and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Then I'm going to do reflectance. And the only reason I changed is because I didn't have a reflectance for that other material. So you'll notice in here I have 5 or 6, 7 different materials. So now I'm working on the reflectance. So that could be like what you could think of as specular. So watch what happens when I hit OK. And you barely saw it, but it kind of changed how reflective that material is. And it's using this map. Now, it basically looks like a solid color. It could have a little bit of speckling going on. It could have some lighter colors, darker colors in there. It's really kind of hard to tell, but right now it's just kind of a plain color. Same thing with roughness. Watch what happens when I change the roughness. So if we crank it way down, it's like polished glass, smooth. It's reflecting my background into this material. But if you were to like sand the top of that material, it's going to still reflect a little bit, but not as clear. And if we crank that, way up, it's not going to look very polished at all, right? So we'll use the, I already forgot, roughness map. So right here, muddy brick roughness. I'll hit open. And now you can see this is the map that's causing the water to reflect. So basically, like what is white will reflect, will have no roughness, and what is dark will have a lot of roughness, and then all the grays in between will kind of define how, is it reflective or not reflective. And so that's how, basically using that one map, I'm able to get this kind of material looking like so. Pretty cool. Translucency and emissive, I can't even say it, emissivity. This one is, does it broadcast light? Is it like an LED light or whatever? So obviously we're not going to do that. It's also not translucent. Can you see through it? Kind of like a light bulb or whatever. So we're not going to do anything there. However, relief pattern we are. So I'm going to go ahead and check that guy. And I'm going to use this normal. Or I could use this displacement. Doesn't really matter. I could use either of these. So let's do the normal. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now here is the one thing that I'm going to point out that is weird coming from Quixel Mixer into Fusion. You'll notice this image, and now my material looks really kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but you'll see all these little speckles and all that kind of stuff. Why is that? Well, let me show you. If I start up here on this image, I can edit this image. And you'll see the sample size is 12 inches by 12 inches. Okay, same thing with this guy, same thing with this guy. If I edit that roughness, you'll see sample size is 12 by 12. For whatever reason, the relief pattern defaults to 1 inch. So you can see the sample size is set to 1. So I need to make this match the other one. So I'm going to click or type in 12 and then watch my material. Now looks better, right? Okay. Then we have this depth, and you can kind of see, so Fusion does not change the actual physical surface of the model, which is what you would call a displacement. Fusion can't do that. So what this material is doing is it kind of simulating that. It's trying to fool the eye. So you're going to see some darks and some lights and some reflectivity that's going to make you look like the mud is going up and down, even though it's a flat plane. So just keep that in mind. It's not going to look as good as it does in Quixel Mixer, because that one's actually doing displacement maps, but it gets pretty darn close. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about. You can kind of see these little lines and edges here, kind of simulating the depth of that material. Now I can change this, and I'm going to kind of zoom up so we can kind of see what this looks like. Let's change that from 1 to 0.1, and it'll still give it some reflectivity and all that kind of stuff. I can even change that to 0.01 and just mess with these numbers a little bit to see what looks good. And so there, you can kind of see it's not quite as bumpy. It looks a little flat or whatever. So I might say 0.05 in this case. Okay. There we get some character around those puddles, that kind of a thing. And that is honestly about what you do to create these materials. So I'll hit apply, I'll hit OK, and let's close this guy out. If I hover over this, I can see that it's mud. I could even drag that on top of this guy here and make it look, like muddy corrugated material if I wanted to. I have a lot of control over this. I can now come in and change the scale. So we could scale this down or scale it up. So you can see now there's a lot more water. I could scale it larger if I wanted to, so you can kind of see what we get with that. So my point being here is you're able to create these materials very quickly and very easily. So let's do the copper one. So I'm going to undo back to here. In fact, I will go ahead and just put aluminum satin back on that guy. So I'm going to start with another base material. Now I could do metal. In fact, I could try both and see what they look like. I'm going to do opaque. That's kind of what I'm comfortable with. So there's the opaque. I'll edit this guy. And checking my questions real quick. Okay. I see some questions. I will make sure I get back to those. So, okay, so I created this. I'm going to call this, new copper or something like that. Go into my advanced. And just to show you how quick this really is. So, image. We'll come in here and let's do the copper demo. So, the color is going to be that albedo. And you can kind of see it changed. It still doesn't look quite like copper or whatever. Come in, do the reflectance. So I'll do the specular. Now, metal is kind of boring because everything is pretty much the same color because it's very reflective. There's not a lot of depth or anything like that to it. So let's do the roughness. Let's see what that looks like. I'll say okay. And if we zoom up, and it's kind of hard to see when I'm hovering over it, you can actually see as I rotate around, you'll see a little bit of the color in there. And again, I can't really point to it because then it highlights the face, but you can see a little bit of the difference on that surface. Now, the lighting also affects this, so let me go ahead and just say OK for now, or apply. Let's change our lighting. Let's crank this down a little bit. And now you can definitely see, you know, that material there. And I'll talk about the lighting and the background here in just a second. Let's set that back to 1000. Okay, and then we'll come back into my material. So the next thing I want to do with this copper, I'll go ahead and edit that. Drag this a little bit larger. So we did the roughness. I'm going to do this relief pattern. And this time I'm going to use this EXR. My other ones I had like this PNG or whatever. I'm going to use this EXR because that's what it exported as. It takes longer, but it gives you kind of a really cool result. And again, it's kind of a, in this example, it's just gray because there was not a lot of texture or anything like that on there. So again, unfortunately, metals are kind of boring, but I'm going to edit this guy and change my sample size to 12. Okay. And then I might change the depth. Let's change it to like 10 or something like that. I'm just going to see if anything changes, and nothing really actually changes. So it's a really kind of a polished material. I should have picked something like rust or something that had a little bit of layers to it or whatever. But you get the idea. I can create that. I'll say done. Okay. And then this is actually kind of cool. I'm just going to go ahead and drag this over here. We can kind of see what that copper looks like. And maybe I don't want it to be as shiny as it is. So I can come back and edit these guys. Now this stuff does nothing because it's all being controlled in the advanced. So you'll notice as I drag this up or down, nothing is really changing by using that. It is all done in here. But what this allows me to do is I can now come in and kind of tweak some of these images. So check this out. I'm going to edit this image, and notice it says brightness. I can crank this down and actually physically change how, you know, this is the original color, but I'm kind of making it not so bright. So we're kind of getting a darker copper, for example. Okay. I could also change the sample size. Let's go to like 3. And that one doesn't have the scratchy layers or anything like that on it. So I would need to do that on, for example, maybe this roughness layer or this reflectance layer. Let me go ahead and edit that guy. And again, I can change how bright the reflectance is. So do I want it to be really reflective, or do I want it to be not as reflective? Okay. Let's change the sample size. Let's just see if that makes the difference. So that one does not. Okay. And then I will come in and let's just do the, I'm assuming the roughness is the layer. So we'll edit that image. And let's change, yeah, and see it's kind of hard to see, but this actually has, I can't zoom up on it, has all those little scratches on it. So let me change the opacity or the brightness here, and you can see that that pretty much goes away. But as I increase that, we start to increase those scratches. I think this is just amazing that I now have control inside of Fusion how dark or strong do I want these scratches to be, for example. And then I could change, let's just go to 6 and 6. For example, and you'll see a lot more scratches. I could even go to 1 and 1, and it'll make it a lot finer material. So again, lots of control over what you can do with the materials. Same thing with the bump map. So let's go ahead and switch over to this guy. I'm getting the warning because I have my component color cycling turned on. Let me turn that guy off. Notice how dark this is. This will make more sense when I talk about the lights. but I'm gonna come over here and let's edit a material real quick. So I hit A for appearance, and it should bring up my appearance dialog. There we go. And so you can see here's the barrel, here's the plastic bag, here's the walls. So I named all of my materials because they all kind of look the same, right? So that way I'm able to, really quickly and easily figure out what this is going to look like. So let's zoom up on one of the barrels because I think that was one of the questions. So let's go ahead and edit this material. So I started with an image or a material from Quixel Mixer, and I brought it in here and did the exact same thing. Here's my image, here's my reflectance, here's the roughness, and the roughness kind of like shows how much light is going to reflect off of certain things. So I could come in here, edit that image. I wish these all stayed the same size, and drag this down, and you can see it looks really shiny. It looks kind of weird, right? But that's because there's all the light is reflecting off of the surface. But by adding this roughness layer in here, you can kind of see there's the wood grain, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty amazing, and you can see the light reflecting kind of off the metal. And if I crank that all the way up, then there's no light reflecting off that metal. Same thing with this bump map. So I can control the strength of that. So this is a PNG. I have a depth of 1. Let's crank it up to like 10, for example. It's going to look really weird, but you can see how it really emphasizes that wood grain now, because it's basically taking this map and saying instead of 0 to 1, make it 0 to 10 for the depth. So that's what that's kind of showing there. Okay, let me look at these questions really quick. So somebody, Patrick asked, can you create an iridescent material needed for fusion? I will take, if I have time, I will try and do that. Okay, so great question, Patrick. Also asked, are the materials seamless so they can be applied to large areas of a model? And the answer is yes, kind of. I wish they were a little bit more seamless than they really are. You will notice some repetitivity. So this icon right here is preview tiling. I'm going to zoom out, but you'll notice like there's a patch here and a patch here that look very similar. So it is going to repeat. I can control that in this placement, this tiling, all that kind of stuff. And how big is my original material? Remember, it was like 4,000 pixels. I could make it 8,000 pixels, and that would allow me to have less repetitions, for example. So that's what that icon is there. In fact, let me just go ahead and open one of these. Let's do the stylized floor. Let's just see what that looks like. Okay, yeah, this is kind of a weird one, but this should be really good for preview tiling, so you can kind of see what that would look like. So it does a pretty good job. But like, for example, my eye instantly goes to these 4 pieces here, so I can tell that those are tiled. Stephen asks, can I export all my material maps that I can create in Zbrush? So hopefully I'm understanding the question. If you create materials in Zbrush, can you bring them into Fusion? Not really. So we do not do UV mapping yet. So for example, if you were to paint something, in fact, on this image, let me just bring up the, where is it? Sorry. Bring up this guy. So let me go products, mixer. Sorry guys. So you can see here, and there's actually a really cool tutorial on how they created this. They actually paint a lot of the scratches and dings and the logos and all that kind of stuff onto here. I could not export this model and the materials into Fusion and have it look like it does here, because it does not do the UV mapping. So you would need to do something like that with ZBrush and in ZBrush. So good question. Okay. So hopefully, oh yeah, I'm sorry. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the lighting. So if I go into my scene settings, environment library, you'll notice I'm using what's called an HDRI image. And this thing is very, very, very powerful. Let me actually show you what it is. I'm going to say environment. I'm going to zoom out, and I can rotate around, and you can see that this is the image that it is using to reflect into these materials. I can also change my brightness, so you'll see the image will get darker, and so does my scene. It gets darker. So it's using the information from this background image to light my scene. Now, I can come in here and say replace custom environment, and I have a whole bunch of different ones. So here's like a decor shop. Watch what happens to my lighting once it brings this in. It's gonna, maybe it might have more red in it, might have more yellow in it or something like that. In fact, there you go. You can kind of see it must have a lot of orange or something. And sure enough, if I zoom out, you can kind of see it's like on the inside of an office or something like that. It's got these yellow lights, and so that's what's reflecting in these materials. I could come in here and change the brightness, but you can see how I get a totally different result using that particular HDRI image than the other one. So where do you get these HDRI images? I recommend a webpage called HDRI Haven. There's a bunch out there. This is one of the more popular ones. Again, it's free. And I can do, for example, like indoor. So I'll click on indoor, and you can see all of these different images and stuff like that. So here's that decor shop, I think. So here's like a photo studio. So I'm just going to click on that guy. You can kind of see it's specially designed to wrap around a spherical object. That's why it kind of looks the way it does. And then you can see that you can download them here. I usually do the 4K. Obviously, the higher, the larger, but the more accurate you're going to get. I've had really good luck with 4K. You'll notice that downloaded. It's called Photo Studio 01. I'll come in here and pick on Photo Studio 01. And it's now going to use this Photo Studio to illuminate this scene. But you're going to get much more realistic looking renderings. In fact, that's actually pretty cool looking. It kind of lights everything pretty evenly. I might come back here and tweak with my brightness a little bit, but you can kind of see it's a little gray, but it's not as brown as the other one was. So that's how you get these realistic looking reflections and textures and all that kind of stuff to look really nice. Is I highly recommend using custom HDRI images. Okay. Oh, so Patrick asked, can I change the thumbnail to indicate a different shape? So what he's talking about is in the material, and the answer is yes. Oh, let me check something real quick. Okay, it looks like I'm still streaming. Okay, so I'm going to come over here. Hopefully we're still streaming, and if somebody can say that everything's going good. Angelo said he lost the stream on his end, but he doesn't know if it's his computer or not. So hopefully everything is good. So the question was, can I change what this looks like right here? And the answer is yes. So for example, this barrel, if I go and edit the, I'm sorry, let me go here. I know you can. I've done it before. It's up here, I think it is. Yeah, there we go. So if I go here, you'll see this little down arrow. So I can pick a different scene. So you'll see all of these guys. I can pick a different environment. What's the light that it's using for this particular icon? And then what are the render settings. And you can see it's set to quick. I can also do draft or production, so it'll actually create a much more realistic looking one, but that will definitely slow things down. Okay, thank you everybody for shouting out in the chat. I appreciate that. So I'm going to go to the scene and say, for example, cylinder, and you're going to see what that looks like there. I could say, you know, vase or whatever, and it's going to actually, and again, it's kind of hard to see. I think I can change the size of this by dragging this down. So there you can kind of see what that looks like. You know, I could say plaza, and you're going to see it's going to give different results. Snowfield. Yeah, they're all kind of the same because this is kind of a not very reflective material. So yes, I can do spheres, etc. So hopefully that answers your question, Patrick. Okay. Let me close out of this. So I know this was kind of a weird one. Not very much in Fusion. It was a lot about this Quixel Mixer, but it really does take your renderings kind of to the next level, especially if you're doing interior designs or you know, stuff besides just product designs. But even then, for example, if I had modeled a really cool knife, for example, and I want to show what that looks like, I might put some scratches on the blade. I might put some dings along the edge or something like that to show that this product's been used and is strong and, you know, that kind of a thing. If I'm doing like a coffee maker, I might have, you know, fingerprints near the buttons or scratches from where it gets pulled in and out of the cabinet or something like that, right? So play around with these different materials and see what you can do with them. Again, I have no relation with Quixel Mixer. It was just something that I found to be kind of interesting, and it took the renderings to the next level. Be warned that in Fusion, the renderings are not going to look exactly how they do in Quixel, because Quixel has a lot more like displacement mapping and ambient occlusion and all that kind of stuff that Fusion rendering doesn't have, but it does get you pretty darn close. So with that, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we will see you on a future live stream. Have fun fusioning.